The room was filled with cigar smoke and spilled whiskey. Men in dark suits laughed loudly, their voices echoing off the hardwood paneled walls. In the center of the stifling room, Emily trembled. Her hands were tied behind her back, and she stared at the cold marble floor. Silent tears streamed down her pale face, but no sound escaped her lips. She couldn't scream. She couldn't call for help. In the eyes of everyone there, she was deaf and mute, a defective commodity being auctioned like cattle. 20,000 for her! Shouted a fat man with a gray mustache, raising his glass of brandy with a disgusting smile. 30, responded another, younger, with scars on his neck. The voices mingled in a grotesque chorus of greed and depravity. Emily squeezed her eyes shut, wishing she could disappear. How had she gotten here? How had her own father done this to her? The answer was simple and brutal. Gary had traded his only daughter for money to pay off gambling debts and feed his alcohol addiction. He had sold her as if she were a commodity, worthless, without a future. And now, at 19, Emily was being auctioned off in a clandestine Brooklyn basement to the highest bidder. 50,000! The voice cut through the air like a sharp blade. Silence fell over the room like a heavy blanket. All eyes turned to the man who had just spoken. He was leaning against the back wall, shrouded in shadows, but his presence dominated the entire room. Even without seeing him clearly, Emily felt a chill run down her spine. There was something different about him, something dangerous. The auctioneer, a short, nervous man named Vincent, swallowed hard. Mr. Blackwell, his voice trembled slightly. 50,000, sold. The other men murmured among themselves, but no one dared challenge the bid. They all knew the name Blackwell, Christopher Blackwell, the most feared man in New York, head of one of the largest criminal organizations on the East Coast. A man who didn't accept a challenge. A man whose icy gaze had frozen the blood of countless adversaries before eliminating them without remorse. Emily heard footsteps approaching, heavy, steady, deliberate. She kept her head down, her heart pounding so hard it seemed to want to burst from her chest. A strong hand gripped her chin and lifted her face firmly, but not brutally. She was forced to look up, and then her eyes met his. Christopher Blackwell was tall, with broad shoulders that perfectly complemented his impeccable black suit. His dark hair was slicked back, revealing an angular face with striking features, a strong jaw, thin lips, and blue-gray eyes that seemed capable of seeing through anyone's soul. There was a thin scar above his left eyebrow, a reminder of some past battle. He studied her silently for long seconds. Emily kept her expression blank, as she had learned to do. Show no emotion, not react to sounds, pretending the world around her was just silent images. It was the only way to survive this hell. Christopher tilted his head slightly as if analyzing something that made no sense. Then wordlessly, he released her chin and turned to Vincent. Get the papers ready. I'll take her now. Vincent nodded quickly, nearly tripping in his own haste. Yes, Mr. Blackwell, immediately. Minutes later, Emily was led out of the basement by 2 security guards. The October night in Brooklyn was cold and damp, the biting wind carrying the smell of garbage and salt water from the nearby East River. A luxurious black car waited on the dark street, its engine humming softly. Christopher Blackwell was already seated in the back seat when they pushed Emily inside. The door closed with a thud, and the car began to move smoothly through the deserted streets. Emily huddled in the opposite corner of the seat, trying to make herself as small as possible. She could feel his gaze on her, heavy and penetrating, but she didn't dare look up. Look at me. His voice was deep, controlled, but carried a weight of absolute authority. Emily hesitated for only a second before obeying. Pretending to be deaf meant not responding to verbal commands, but something about his presence made her move instinctively. Mistake. A small mistake, but a mistake. Christopher's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. He watched the way she had responded to his command. Too fast, too precise. A truly deaf person would have continued staring into space, oblivious to his words. Interesting, he murmured, more to himself than to her. The rest of the drive was spent in tense silence. Emily stared at her hands, trembling in her lap. Every second felt like an eternity. What would he do to her? Every horrific scenario flashed through her mind like a horror film in slow motion. Finally, the car stopped in front of an imposing building in Manhattan. The pale stone facade soared dozens of stories, huge windows reflecting the lights of the city that never sleeps. A uniformed doorman opened the car door with a respectful bow. Christopher got out first and held out his hand to Emily. She looked at his hand, large, strong, with subtle scars on the knuckles, and for a moment considered refusing. But what would be the point? She had nowhere to go. No one. Reluctantly, she placed her small, cold hand in his. The apartment was like nothing Emily had ever seen. The private elevator opened directly into a penthouse that took up the entire top floor. Italian marble floors, soaring ceilings with crystal chandeliers, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning panoramic view of illuminated Manhattan. Modern art decorated the walls, some pieces Emily was sure she'd seen in books about famous museums. Everything was elegant, expensive, and terribly intimidating. Christopher walked straight to a polished mahogany bar and poured himself an amber whiskey. He removed his suit jacket and draped it carefully over the back of a chair, revealing black suspenders over a pristine white shirt. Then he turned to Emily, who stood frozen near the entrance, the red marks of the ropes still on her wrists. "Do you have a name?" he asked, his voice echoing faintly in the vast space. Emily didn't answer. She kept her eyes lowered, her hands clasped in front of her. Christopher took a slow sip of the whiskey, watching her with meticulous attention. Something was wrong. He dealt with enough people, liars, traitors, spies, to develop a keen instinct for dishonesty. And this girl, there was something about her that didn't fit. Deaf, they said. He took a few steps toward her, his leather shoes making a distinct sound against the marble. Completely deaf since childhood. Can't speak because she's never heard words. Emily remained motionless. Her heart hammered, but she forced her face to remain neutral. Christopher stopped a few feet away. "So you can't hear me now?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement fraught with something else. Doubt, perhaps. Curiosity. He raised his right hand suddenly as if to strike her. Emily didn't blink, didn't flinch. She'd trained for this, to not react to sudden movements toward her. But her body betrayed her in another way. Her shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly, an involuntary reaction to fear. Christopher saw it. He always saw it. Lowering his hand slowly, he circled her like a predator studying his prey. "Your father sold you for $15,000. His voice was casual now, almost conversational. "Gary Morrison, chronic alcoholic, compulsive gambler, owes money to half the loan sharks in Queens. He swore you were deaf and mute, that you'd be perfect for housework because you couldn't tell secrets." Emily felt bile rise in her throat at the mention of her father's name. That man who should have protected her. That man who had fed and clothed her, yes, but who had also beaten her when drunk, yelled obscenities at her when he lost at poker, and finally sold her like a commodity to pay off his bad debts. "But I paid $50,000. Christopher stopped in front of her again. "Do you know why?" Silence. "Because every other idiot in that room wanted you for unsavory reasons." His voice hardened. "I don't buy people for that purpose. Never have. Never will. That's not my business. So the question is," he leaned in slightly, bringing his face closer to hers. Emily could smell whiskey and something more masculine, woody. "Why are you pretending?" The world seemed to stop. Emily felt the blood drain from her face. He knew. Somehow he knew, but she couldn't admit it. To admit it would be to destroy the only protection she had. If her father found out, she could hear perfectly. If those horrible men knew, she would be a liability, a witness, someone who needed to be silenced permanently. "Look at me." It was a command again. This time, Emily kept her eyes deliberately lowered. Christopher sighed, not with frustration, but with something close to interest. "Okay, let's test this." He stepped away from her and walked to a tall bookcase filled with leather-bound books. He pulled out a heavy volume and dropped it on the floor behind her. Bang! The sound echoed through the apartment like a gunshot. Emily didn't move, didn't turn her head, but her breathing quickened for a split second. So quickly she hoped he hadn't noticed. He did. Christopher walked back to her, now with a small, cold smile on his lips. Impressive. You're good. Very good. He crossed his arms, but not perfect. Before Emily could process what was happening, Christopher was beside her, his lips inches from her ear. I know you can hear me, Emily Morrison, and I'm going to find out why you're lying. This time, Emily couldn't control her reaction. Her eyes widened briefly and she took a small step back. It was all Christopher needed. There it is. His voice was almost triumphant. I knew it. Emily felt hot tears burning her eyes. Years of careful pretense, years of survival through deception, destroyed in minutes by this dangerous, cunning man. But instead of the fear she expected to feel, something different blossomed in her chest. Relief. A terrible, liberating relief that someone finally knew the truth. Christopher saw the tears and his expression hardened, but not with anger, with something more complicated. Sit. He gestured to a soft leather sofa near the windows. When Emily didn't move, he added more softly, please. Slowly, like a wounded animal approaching a stranger offering food, Emily walked to the sofa and sat on the edge, her back straight, ready to bolt at any moment. Christopher sat in the opposite chair, resting his elbows on his knees, the glass of whiskey hanging loosely in one hand. I'm going to ask you some questions. You don't have to answer verbally if you don't want to. Just nod your head yes or no. Pause. Can you hear me perfectly? Emily closed her eyes. Then slowly she nodded. You've always been able to hear? Another nod. Does your father know? She hesitated, then shook her head no. Why pretend? This was more complicated. Emily opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She hadn't spoken aloud in so long that her voice seemed to have been buried somewhere deep inside her, forgotten and atrophied. Christopher waited patiently as Emily struggled to find her voice. Finally, in a hoarse, shaky whisper, she spoke her first words in years. Protection. The word came out broken, rough with disuse. Being deaf made me invisible. Safe. Christopher leaned forward, his expression intense. Safe from whom? Emily shook her head, tears now flowing freely. From everyone. My father, his friends. They talked in front of me about terrible things, crimes, plans. They thought I couldn't hear, so they wouldn't hurt me to keep me quiet. While I was deaf, I was too useless to kill. The truth of those words hung in the air like poisonous smoke. Christopher understood immediately. A girl who could hear was a liability, a potential witness. But a deaf girl? She could witness anything and never tell. It was invisible armor in a brutal world. How old were you when you started pretending? Emily wiped her tears with the back of her hand. 12. My mother died of cancer when I was 11. After that, Dad started drinking heavily. He brought bad men home, gamblers, drug dealers, debt collectors. They talked about horrible things. Her voice shook. One day one of them noticed I was listening. He said I was a problem, that kids who know too much disappear. Christopher clenched his jaw. He knew these kinds of men. They were parasites, predators who preyed on the weak. Then you stopped responding to sounds. I faked a fall. I hit my head. Dad was so drunk he believed me when I stopped responding to his calls. He took me to a private doctor at a health clinic. I didn't respond to any tests. The doctor said I'd lost my hearing, probably from head trauma. She let out a bitter, humorless laugh. Dad was relieved. He said I wouldn't be a problem now. And you kept up the charade for 7 years. It wasn't a question. It was admiration disguised as affirmation. Emily nodded weakly. I learned to actually read lips, to sell the lie better. I stopped speaking completely because people born deaf often don't speak clearly. It got easier over time. I became invisible. Christopher stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city that stretched below like an ocean of lights. Your father sold you because you were defective. He received less money for you because of it. Yes. Emily's voice was barely a whisper. He said I was a useless burden, that at least I would serve to pay his debts. Christopher turned abruptly, his gray eyes blazing with cold anger. He was wrong. Emily blinked, surprised by the vehemence in his voice. You survived. Christopher took measured steps back toward her. You used intelligence and self-control to protect yourself in an impossible environment. You are stronger than your father will ever be. You are stronger than most men I know. The words hit Emily like physical blows. No one had ever said anything like that to her. No one had ever seen her as strong. She'd always been the silent girl, the flawed daughter, the burden. Why did you buy me? The words were out before she could stop them. If you knew something was wrong. Christopher sat back down, this time a little closer. I didn't know for sure at the time, but something was wrong with the whole situation. Men like those in the room, they're scum. And when I saw you there, trembling but with your eyes full of intelligence. He paused. I couldn't leave you with them. But you are. Emily hesitated. You're a crime boss, a dangerous man. Yes. Christopher didn't deny it. I am. I kill people when necessary. I break laws. I run an empire built on things society condemns. He inclined his head. But I have rules, lines I don't cross. Children are one of them, and women forced into slavery are another. Emily studied him, really studied him for the first time. There was a hardness in his face, yes, scars that told stories of violence. But there was also something else in his eyes, something almost honorable. Could a criminal have honor? What are you going to do with me? She needed to know, needed to understand what her fate would be now that the secret was out. Christopher watched her for a long moment. You have two options, Emily. Option one, I get you new papers, enough money to start over somewhere else. You disappear. You change your name. You build a new life away from your father, away from this world. Emily felt hope glow in her chest. Freedom, a new life. It was more than she had ever dared dream. And option two, you stay here, with me. His voice was neutral, but his eyes were intense. Not as property, as an assistant. I need someone intelligent, someone who can move invisibly through certain environments, someone people wouldn't pay attention to because they think they're deaf. The proposal was shocking. Work for a crime boss, become part of his world of violence and secrets. But then Emily thought about the alternative. Run away, alone, with no real-world experience, no skills other than pretending to be something she wasn't. How long would she last before getting into trouble again? Why me? Emily asked. Why would you trust me? Because you spent 7 years living a perfect lie to survive. Christopher leaned forward. It requires discipline, intelligence, and nerves of steel. Those are qualities I value, qualities I can use. He paused. And because you understand me, you've seen the underworld. You know how these things work. You won't be shocked or faint the first time things get ugly. Emily processed his words. There was logic there, a cold, calculating logic. But there was also truth. She had seen horrible things. Her innocence had been stolen long ago. If I stay, would I be free to leave if I changed my mind? Yes. Christopher didn't hesitate. I don't hold people prisoner against their will. If you stay, it will be by choice. And if you decide to leave, I will help you do so safely. It was more honesty than Emily had expected, more respect than anyone had given her in years. May I think about it? Christopher nodded. Of course. You have a week. In the meantime, you stay here. There's a guest room with an inside lock. You can lock the door if you wish. Tomorrow my maid, Margaret, will bring you suitable clothing. I won't touch you. I won't hurt you. You have my word. Emily wanted to laugh. A criminal's word. But strangely, she believed him. Perhaps because he had no reason to lie. If he wanted to hurt her, he would have already. Thank you. The words were low, but sincere. Christopher stood. Margaret will also bring food. You're very thin. Your father didn't feed you properly, it seems. Anger returned briefly to his eyes. He led her down a long hallway to a spacious bedroom with its own ensuite bathroom. The bed was enormous, covered in soft white sheets. There was a bookshelf, a desk near the window, and yes, a lock on the inner door. "Rest." Christopher paused in the doorway. "You're safe here." Then he left, closing the door softly behind him. Emily stood in the middle of the room for long minutes, unable to believe what had happened in the last few hours. She had been auctioned off, bought for $50,000, her deepest secret discovered, and now she was in a luxurious Manhattan apartment being offered a choice, a real choice. Over the next 6 days, Emily's life changed in ways she never imagined possible. Margaret, a middle-aged Irish woman with kind eyes and graying hair, showed up the next morning with suitcases full of clothes. Not maids' uniforms or old rags, but beautiful, comfortable clothes in her exact size. There were jeans, blouses, soft sweaters, even a few simple but elegant dresses. "Mr. Blackwell had everything new, dear," Margaret said with a warm smile as she organized the clothes in Emily's bedroom closet. "He said you'd need a proper wardrobe." Emily, still unaccustomed to speaking aloud, simply nodded her thanks. Margaret didn't seem to mind her silence. "He's a good man, you know. I know it may not seem that way considering his line of work, but he has a heart beneath all that hardness. I've worked for him for 12 years, and he's never treated me with anything but respect." Emily wanted to ask more, but the words still came with difficulty. Margaret seemed to understand anyway. "You've been hurt, I can see that. But you're safe now. He wouldn't let anything bad happen to you under this roof, trust me." And strangely, Emily did. The days settled into an unexpected routine. Christopher left early in the morning, always impeccably dressed in tailored suits, his presence filling the apartment even when he was about to leave. He didn't pressure her into conversation or decisions, just a polite wave in the morning, sometimes a soft good morning if he saw her. Emily spent her mornings exploring the apartment. It was vast. 4 bedrooms, a formal living room, a library that took her breath away with its floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with books, a modern kitchen where Margaret prepared incredible meals, and that office whose door was always closed. She didn't dare open it. In the afternoons, she read. God, how she read! Years of education interrupted by her mother's death. Years of pretending to be something she wasn't. Years of forced silence. It all spilled out of her in the pages of those books. She devoured classics, history, philosophy, even a few detective novels that made her smile wryly given her current situation. Christopher would return at dusk, usually between 8 and 9. Sometimes he brought the scent of cigar smoke and something darker, danger, restrained violence. Other times he simply seemed tired, the weight of his criminal empire visible on his tense shoulders. They dined together. At first they were silent meals. Emily still struggled to speak, and Christopher seemed to respect her space. But gradually, over the days, he began asking small questions. "Did you like the books you chose? Margaret said you ate well today. Are you feeling better? Is there anything specific you'd like to eat tomorrow?" Simple, unpressured questions. And slowly, Emily began to respond. First with nods, then with one-syllable words, then eventually with short sentences in her hoarse, hesitant voice. "The books are wonderful, thank you. The soup was delicious. Margaret is a great cook. Maybe pasta, if that's okay." Christopher hung on every word as if it mattered. He never interrupted her, never rushed her. He just listened, his gray eyes attentive and thoughtful. On the 5th night, he asked something different. "Emily, have you thought about what you want to do? If you decide to leave, I need to start getting the papers." Emily pushed the food around her plate, her fork scratching lightly against the fine china. She had thought about this constantly. Running away meant freedom, yes, but it also meant loneliness, uncertainty, constant fear of her father finding her. Staying meant entering a dangerous world, but it also meant what? Protection? Purpose? Can I ask you a question first?" Christopher put down his fork. "Of course. If I stay, what exactly would you expect of me?" He considered his answer carefully. "Initially, observation. I often have meetings here in my office. Meetings with people who don't know you can hear. Your presence would be helpful. They would speak freely, thinking you were deaf and mute. You would hear things I need to know. It was espionage, using her 7-year lie as a weapon. The idea should have horrified her. Instead, Emily felt something close to intrigue. And then, eventually, if you prove trustworthy and are willing, I could train you in other skills: self-defense, navigating the criminal world, how to read people, detect lies, protect yourself. Her voice hardened slightly. You've been a victim your entire life, Emily. A victim of your father's alcoholism, a victim of poverty, a victim of men who would see you as merchandise. I can teach you to never be a victim again. The words resonated deeply with something inside her. All her life, she had been pushed, hurt, controlled by circumstances beyond her control. The idea of learning to defend herself, of having her own power, it was seductive, dangerous, and terribly appealing. But there's no rush. Christopher picked up his wine glass. Think about it for another day. Tomorrow night, give me your answer. Emily nodded, but something in her heart already knew what her decision would be. That night, she lay in the huge, comfortable bed, staring at the ceiling. Outside, Manhattan shimmered and hummed with life. Millions of people going about their lives, completely oblivious to the silent drama unfolding in this penthouse. She thought of her mother, dead 8 years, but never forgotten. A kind woman who had tried to protect Emily from an increasingly violent and neglectful husband. What would her mother say about this situation? She would probably advise her to run away, to seek safety away from dangerous men. But her mother had also taught Emily to be strong, to survive no matter what. And maybe, just maybe, staying here was her best chance of not just surviving, but of truly living. On the morning of the 6th day, Emily woke with a new determination burning in her chest. She dressed carefully, dark jeans and a navy blouse Margaret had brought, and combed her long brown hair. For the first time in years, she looked at her reflection in the mirror and truly saw herself. Not the deaf, frightened girl, not the victim shivering in a basement, but Emily Morrison, 19 years old, survivor, and maybe soon, something more. Christopher was in the kitchen when she emerged from her room, a cup of black coffee in his hand as he read something on his tablet. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression changed, surprised perhaps, at the determination in her eyes. "Good morning. Good morning." Emily took a deep breath. "I've made my decision." Christopher put down the tablet, giving her his full attention. "Yes, I'm staying." The words came out firmly, clearer than anything she'd said since she'd started talking again. "I want to stay. I want to learn. I want to stop being a victim." Christopher studied her face for a long moment. Then for the first time since she'd met him, he smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Welcome aboard, Emily." He extended his hand. This time, when Emily took it, it wasn't the grip of a victim accepting their fate. It was the grip of two people making a deal that would change both their lives forever. 3 months passed in a blur of change and discovery. Emily quickly discovered that Christopher Blackwell was a man of his word. He didn't treat her like property, nor like a disposable subordinate. Instead, he became something between a protector, a mentor, and, though neither would say it out loud, something close to a friend. Training began immediately. Every morning at 6, a man named Marcus would show up at the apartment. He was a scarred ex-military man with stories Emily preferred not to know, but his hands were gentle as he taught her the fundamentals of self-defense. "You're small, so never try to match strength with strength," he instructed as he showed her how to use an attacker's weight against him. "Use speed, use surprise, and always aim for the vulnerable spots: eyes, throat, knees." Emily practiced until her muscles screamed, until sweat ran down her back, until the movements became muscle memory. She had spent 7 years training herself not to react. Now she was training to fight back. Afternoons were devoted to a different kind of education. Christopher personally taught her about his world, not the gory details of violence and crime, but its structure, the New York crime families, the fragile political alliances, the deals that happened in the shadows. Knowledge is power, he would say, sitting in his library with a map of Manhattan, marked with territories and zones of influence. You have to understand the chessboard before you can play the game. Emily absorbed it all. Her mind, honed by years of silent observation, proved exceptionally good at retaining information and connecting dots. She asked intelligent questions that often made Christopher pause and look at her with that expression of respectful surprise she was beginning to recognize. So if the Calabresi family controls the port and the Romano family controls the casinos, why aren't they at war over the overlapping territory in Red Hook? She asked one afternoon. Christopher smiled. He was smiling more often now, Emily noticed. Excellent question. They have a deal brokered by me. I provide money laundering services for both, which means it's in their interest to keep me happy by keeping the peace. You're the neutral link. Exactly. In a world of violence, the man who can keep the peace holds the true power. It was a fascinating philosophy, and Emily found herself understanding the brutal logic behind it. Christopher wasn't just a violent criminal. He was a strategist, a diplomat in a lawless world. The first time Christopher asked Emily to use her special skills was on a Tuesday afternoon, 4 weeks after her decision to stay. I have a meeting this afternoon, he said over breakfast. 3 men who claim to want to make a partnership agreement with me, but my gut tells me something's wrong. Emily felt her heart race. This would be her first real test. Do you want me to observe? Yes. You'll bring coffee to the conference room, play the deaf and mute maid. They won't pay attention to you, but I need you to pay attention to them. Every word, every look, every hesitation. You'll report back to me later. It was dangerous. If her charade were discovered, the consequences could be fatal. But Emily had already made up her mind. She would no longer be the girl hiding, terrified of the world. I'm ready. The 3 men arrived at 3 o'clock sharp. Emily watched them through the security camera in Christopher's room before entering. 2 were middle-aged, typical Italian Mafia types in expensive but classless suits. The 3rd was younger, thinner, with nervous eyes that never stopped moving. Christopher welcomed them into his office, an impressive room with tall windows, a massive mahogany desk, and in the corners, hidden security cameras that Emily now knew were always recording. She entered 5 minutes after the meeting began, pushing a cart with coffee, fine china cups, and small cookies Margaret had prepared. She kept her eyes downcast, her movements mechanical and careful, like someone navigating the world without sound. Ah, coffee, perfect. One of the older men, he'd been introduced as Tony Marchetti, didn't even glance at her. Your maid? Yes, Christopher replied casually. Deaf and mute. Convenient enough not to worry about secrets being overheard. The men laughed. Emily poured the coffee slowly, each movement deliberate to give her maximum time in the room. So, about our proposal, began the second oldest man, Vincent Rousseau. We want to open 3 new distribution routes through your contacts at the port. In exchange, you receive 15% of the profits. Christopher picked up his cup. 15% seems low considering the risk my contacts would be taking. As they negotiated numbers, Emily noticed something. The younger man, Johnny, she'd heard, kept glancing at the door, not casually but calculatedly, as if timing something, and sweat was gathering on his forehead, despite the air conditioning keeping the office cool. Maybe 20%, Vincent conceded. But we need the containers to pass without inspection. Can you guarantee that? It depends on what's in the containers, Christopher replied calmly. Tony and Vincent exchanged glances. The usual merchandise, some electronics, some pharmaceuticals, drugs, Emily mentally translated. They were talking about drug trafficking, but something in their body language was off. Vincent kept fingering his gold ring, twirling it anxiously. Tony was speaking too quickly, words tumbling over each other. And Johnny checked his watch for the 3rd time in 2 minutes. Something was about to happen. Emily finished pouring the coffee and started pushing the cart toward the door. But as she passed Johnny, she saw him pull out his phone and type something quickly. She couldn't see the screen, but she saw his fingers moving, and then she saw his lips form the silent words, now. Panic shot through her. This was a trap. She didn't know how she knew, but every instinct in her body screamed danger. She reached for the door and walked out, closing it softly behind her. Her heart was pounding. What should she do? If she stormed back, she'd blow up her charade. But if she did nothing, she ran down the hall to the living room where Margaret was folding clothes. "Margaret!" Her voice came out as an urgent whisper. "Get Marcus, now! Tell him Christopher is in danger." Margaret didn't ask questions. Years of working in this house had taught her when to act quickly. She grabbed her phone and dialed, speaking quickly and quietly. Emily ran back into the hallway, her thoughts racing. There was a gun hidden behind the painting in the hallway. Christopher had shown it to her during one of his lessons, saying, "Always know where the nearest exit and the nearest weapon are." She pulled the painting aside, revealing a small safe built into the wall. Her fingers trembled as she typed in the code she'd memorized. The safe opened. Inside was a black pistol, cold and heavy. Emily had never held a real gun before. Marcus had only just started teaching her about firearms last week, just the basics of safety and posture. But there was no time for doubt. With shaking hands, she checked the magazine for bullets as Marcus had taught her, unlocked the safety, and walked back toward the office. She was 10 feet from the door when she heard it, the unmistakable sound of wood breaking, the main entrance door being forced open. Men entering. She could hear heavy boots, low voices coordinating. Office. Last hallway on the left. Be quick. There were at least 4 of them, maybe 5. And she was alone in the hallway with a gun she barely knew how to use and 3 months of basic self-defense training. Every instinct screamed at her to hide, to go back to her room, to lock the door. But Christopher was in that office. Christopher, who had saved her from a fate worse than death. Christopher, who had never hurt her, who had treated her with respect when the whole world had treated her like trash. The intruders were in the hallway now. Emily could see them. 4 large men with professional-grade weapons, bulletproof vests, their faces covered with black balaclavas. Hired mercenaries, not street gangsters. This was a professional hit. Time seemed to slow. Emily saw herself from outside her body. A 19-year-old girl, 100 pounds soaking wet, holding a gun that seemed enormous in her small hands, about to do something absolutely insane. But she didn't stop. Instead, she did exactly what Marcus had taught her in their survival tactics sessions. If you can't fight, be unpredictable. Emily raised the gun with both hands, aimed at the massive crystal chandelier directly above the men, and pulled the trigger. The recoil nearly knocked her backward, but she held on. The bullet struck the chain holding the chandelier. The impact wasn't enough to shatter it completely, but it destabilized the heavy structure. The chandelier swayed violently, crystals tinkling like bells before a storm. The intruders instinctively looked up, a fatal error in divided attention. At that exact second, the office door burst open. Christopher stepped out, his own gun already raised. He had clearly heard Emily's shot and understood the warning. Bang, bang, bang! 3 clean, precise shots. 2 men fell instantly. The third staggered back, clutching his shoulder. The 4th spun and aimed at Emily. She froze, her eyes meeting the barrel of his gun. She was going to die. She was going to die here in this hallway after finally finding something to live for. But then the impossible happened. Christopher moved faster than she thought humans could move. He crossed the distance between them and knocked the shooter to the ground before the man could pull the trigger. A brutal punch to the jaw, and the intruder was unconscious. Silence. A muffled silence broken only by heavy breathing and the distant drone of sirens. Someone in the building must have called the police upon hearing the gunshots. Christopher stood slowly, looking around the scene of carnage. Then his eyes landed on Emily, still frozen in the middle of the hallway, the gun hanging limply in her hands. "You," he began, walking toward her. "You shot the chandelier." I didn't know what else to do," Emily whispered, the adrenaline finally draining, leaving her trembling. "I saw Johnny send a message. I knew it was a trap. And then I heard them coming in and—" Christopher gently took the gun from her hands and activated the safety. Then, to her complete surprise, he pulled her into a tight hug. "You saved my life." His voice was hoarse, raw emotion leaking through his usual control. Those bastards in the office were distracting me. If the shooters had come without warning, I would be dead. Emily clutched at her suit, the shock finally hitting her. They tried to kill you? Yes. Christopher released her, but kept his hands on her shoulders, his gray eyes intense as he studied her face. And you, who spent 7 years invisible and silent to survive, put yourself in danger to warn me. Why? Because, Emily searched for the right words, because you gave me a choice when no one else ever did. Because you saw me as a person when the whole world saw me as a broken thing. Because you... She stopped, realizing the truth even as she spoke. Because you care. Something flashed across Christopher's face. Surprise, vulnerability. Something deeper that he quickly hid, but not before Emily saw it. The sound of heavy boots on the stairs separated them. Marcus arrived first, gun raised, assessing the situation in a split second. Behind him came 3 more security guards Emily had met during her stay. "Sir," Marcus greeted, lowering his weapon when he saw that Christopher was unharmed. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of the bodies. "What the hell happened?" "Attempted murder," Christopher said calmly, already returning to his professional demeanor. "Coordinated with Tony Marchetti and Vincent Russo. They're still in the office, detained but alive. I want to question them before deciding what to do with them." Marcus nodded and gestured to his men. "And Johnny?" Christopher asked. "The youngest. He was the messenger." "In the office bathroom," Marcus said. "He tried to escape through the window, but we're on the 30th floor. He surrendered." "Good. Take all 3 of them to the warehouse in Queens. I'll deal with them personally tomorrow." It was a side of Christopher Emily hadn't seen yet. Cold, calculating, ruthless. The side that built and maintained a criminal empire through force and fear. It should have frightened her. Instead, she understood. In his world, mercy was weakness. Betrayal demanded severe consequences, or more would follow. "What about the police?" Marcus asked as the sirens grew louder. "Let me handle this," Christopher said. "We have people on the payroll. This will be reported as a botched home invasion. The dead will be identified as career criminals. No further investigation will be conducted." Corruption, Emily realized. Christopher's reach extended to the very institutions that were supposed to stop him. It was disturbing and also staggering in its scale. Christopher turned to her. "Emily, go to your room. Change your clothes. There's blood spatter on your sleeve. Margaret will go with you. When the police arrive, you weren't here. You didn't see anything, you didn't hear anything, understood?" Emily nodded. Back to being invisible. Back to being the deaf girl who couldn't testify. The irony wasn't lost on her. As Margaret led her away, Emily glanced back once. Christopher was barking orders at his men, completely in control despite the chaos. But for just a second, his eyes met hers. And in that brief glance, something unspoken passed between them. Something had changed today. She was no longer just the deaf girl he'd bought. He was no longer just the crime boss who had offered her protection. They had bled together, fought together, survived together. And in that moment of violence and chaos, something deeper had been forged. Trust, true trust, the kind that couldn't be bought or commanded, the kind that had to be earned. As Emily washed the blood from her hands in her bedroom bathroom, as she watched the pink water drain down the drain, she knew she had crossed a threshold. There was no going back. She was inside Christopher's world now, really inside. And strangely, for the first time in her life, she didn't feel scared. She felt alive.